Hamas system, it's a totalitarian state. You will not, like in China, communist China, can you get anybody who's not in connection with the party get into a position of any significance? No, you have to be, and you're contaminated with it. It's hard to say, but that's what happens. So now, okay, a few words of wisdom, and then we'll wrap up with Adon Olam. This one is sort of a little bit of the pride for me, and I'll explain why in just a second. I'm going to put on the share. And remember, next week, special guest, Dr. Judith Cohen on Ladino, Sephardic, Moroccan Jewish music. And she's been doing special exhibits on crypto Jews and their traditions. That will be interesting. I'll take it from here. Yeah. Well, crypto Jews, yeah, New Mexico, Colombia, Medellin, and also in Portugal. And Portugal also, she's been doing research there. And so she'll cover a lot of things with us. I hope that the members of the Sephardic Cover will join us on that one. And I'm going into my share screen, share, and
the Persian are Sephardic.
No. See, that's where we get mixed up. Sephardic, there are multiple meanings. For example, Hasidic Jews of Poland and Hungary are Sephardic in the sense that they follow the prayer book, which is a Sephardic prayer book. So their custom is, in some sense, the prayer book of the Sephardic, but they're not Sephardic. So correctly, then the second one is the tradition about which halacha system do you follow. So there's an Ashkenazic halacha system, and there is a Sephardic halacha system. It has nothing to do with Spanish, but because they're following only the text of the core text of Shulchan Aruch and not the Ashkenazic amendments. That's the other side. Then there's Sephardic, meaning those who are out of Sfarad, which would only be predominantly Moroccan Jews, half of the Moroccan Jews, the Balkan Jews. That would be your prime, and then were Jews settled in Amsterdam, made it to the Americas. And then you've got what are called Mizrahi Jews, or generic for all the other Jews, which are the dominant actually Jews of the Middle East. That were at one time, up to the 20th century, up to the 18th century, were actually the bulk of Jews. And that would be your Egyptian community, which is very different from your Syrian community, which is different from your Babylonian community, Baghdad tradition, which is different from your Kurdish tradition, which is very different from your Iranian tradition, and different from your Bukharan tradition. Okay, now Bukharan and Iranian.
The Persians practice the same Judaism that the Persians are in Iran practice?
Oh, the customs and traditions are the same. Yeah, they're the same Jews. Right. Yeah, they haven't changed anything. Yeah, that hasn't changed. Yeah, okay, so here's a good story. It's how Jews spent New Year's Eve in Berlin, 1936. How could I bring this up as a topic? So I get to this because I'm proud to announce there's an exhibit. It opened this week in Frankfurt, Germany. It's where I was born, on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the reestablishing of the Jewish community after the Holocaust. And some of you may know my father, Rabbi Dr. Williams, sometimes we use the German spelling Wilhelm, depending on the context, at that time Weinberg, served as the first state rabbi of the region of Hesse. Hesse is Frankfurt and the environs. If you remember American history, the ones who fought against Washington, they were Hessians. That's the region of Hesse. And he was the chief rabbi. And this followed his service establishing adult education programs for survivors in the DP camps, or displaced persons camps, in the Salzburg area of Austria. So this is the invitation. I share it with you. If you're going to go to Frankfurt, it's running from this week through to May, to the end of May, 75 years of Jewish community in Frankfurt. A nice look how they give it this bright image of kids jumping into a swimming pool, right? A revitalized live community. So I'm proud to say my father's featured prominently in the opening panels of the exhibit, referred to the founding years. And I even got an honorable mention on some of the displays because I provided some of that material. So this is the way the exhibit looks. And You can see there's a little bit dark, but the stands, each stand dedicated to a different period in the decades that followed the reestablishing of the Jewish community. And you know, the little stands, there are visuals, there are audio tapes, there are visual aids. So, just show you here. This from the year 1945 to 1949, New Beginnings, signing out anew, and notice that it's in Russian also. The Russian Jews are a large part now of the Jewish community in Germany, which my father predicted. He said when the Soviet Union, if and so when the Soviet Union falls, one of the most natural places for Russians to gravitate will be in Germany because of its highly advanced culture in Russian Jewish eyes. So, Aufbau, recognizes some things. There's a newspaper, Aufbau, that is a German paper built in, actually printed in the United States, Reconstruction, they translated underneath, the rebuilding. And you see some pictures, and my father is there, and I will click back down. And here, this one of the pictures there shows my father there. He's the youngest of the fellows there at that time, I think, with Rabbi Leo Beck with the goatee in the center, the great leader of German Jewry through the Holocaust, into the Nazi years and through the Holocaust, who was the head of his rabbinical school. And my father there, the only one with dark hair still at that time. And also Max Meyer there, who's my godfather at my birth. He survived because he was married to I'm not sure, it's the sister-in-law of one of the major German generals. Every Nazi had his favorite Jew, and so that's how some Jews survived. And so that was the Sandak of the universe. And here's a picture of the dedication of the synagogue in Frankfurt. And his father is carrying the second Torah scroll there. He refused to wear what was called the bishop's hat. He introduced the use of putting a beret and wear the fedora, top hat, or beret, when it's something that was not associated with the Protestant or the Catholic churches. He insisted on that. And then 2 buttons, and this is important, right? You click on the button, the little speakers. One of them is his speech to the opening of the synagogue, and the other one, his speech when he left Germany a year later, and the dangers of anti-Semitism still lurking in Germany at that time. The Nazis had not yet been eradicated. They were still what they call werewolves in English, still in operation, and he was fighting them with the backing of the United States Army. Did not want his only child to grow up in that milieu. So that's why he came to the United States. So here, there is a recording. I'm going to put it on a broadcast over German radio at that time. I'll just do a few lines because I know not many of you besides Jeff can follow. The announcer, radio announcer, explaining.
Die Gemeinde hat sich erhoben und nun hat Landesrabbiner Dr. Weinberg das ewige Licht entzündet. Es leuchtet rot aus der großen messingenen Ampel. Landesrabbiner Dr. Weinberg spricht nun zum Tage.
Wir haben eben das ewige Licht entzündet und Gottes Namen aus diesem Anlass gesegnet, dass es uns hat erleben lassen. Wir haben es erlebt. Wie vielen war es nicht gegönnt? Meine lieben Brüder und Schwestern, meine sehr verehrten Gäste, es ist schwer in dem Moment, da wir dieses von satanischen Händen zerstörte Gotteshaus wieder einweihen, den Sturm der Gefühle zu bemeistern.
I'm not going to, unless you're really familiar with the German, I'm going to just, just give you a chance to experience my father's voice. But the main thing was, he's lit this eternal lamp, and it is a very painful and difficult thought at this moment that they're rededicating the synagogue in this place in this time after what we have gone through. So anyway, let's go ahead. There, that's my father at the dedication there, standing on the beam of there. So I wanted to shift the tenor of my talk, as long as I'm talking about my father, away from the heavy lifting my father was engaged in at that time, and to reflect on a lighter mood in the decade preceding, before anyone could have known the severity of what would unfold. And we're at the ending of 2023, and it's been or the beginning of 57-84, it's been a very, very heavy year for us sitting here in the United States. As we watch what's going on in Israel, over there, it is exceptionally heavy, certainly. So I thought of this unusual document that had been sent me by a researcher in Germany, and it opened a little light in an otherwise very gloomy time. Will bear with me on this. My father had been one of the leaders of the Jewish Students Zionist Organization in Vienna, and then active in the Jewish Students Organization in Berlin. And he had carried out his studies in the rabbinical school at the Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums, which in simple English is Academy for the scientific study of Judaism. And that was in the early 1930s. He came in just as Hitler came to power, bad time. But family funding for his studies had begun to run out. So he left Berlin for a while to go to Zurich, where he earned extra money as a tutor. And he was trying to get back to Berlin to finish his studies. So while he was there, he was caught in a scheme that was intended to bring him back to Berlin in his studies, but instead landed him in prison. It was entrapment. Someone was out to get him because of his political activities. So he ended up in two prisons, first in the Moabit, where he was called in for investigation and holding till the trial, and then Brandenburg prison. I'm surprised what good record keepers the Germans are till today. I was sent his entire dossier, a copy of the entire dossier. So this is the first page of his dossier, Namen des Deutsches Volks, in the name of the German peoples. And he's arraigned in trial for financial crimes. And there's a judge, and then the jury is a mechanic and a mail post inspector. He asked, what kind of court is that when the judge is the mechanic and the post inspector? A kangaroo court set up. And the archivist at Brandenburg found among the legal documents a personal letter from a friend of his, one named Oscar Gelman, dated January 17, 1936, and an extra note by Erna, who may have been the wife of Oscar. So I thought it's interesting, as it's humorous, how can we have a little bit of humor in time of trouble? His friend not only decided to appraise him of the everyday events of his acquaintances during the time he was in prison, but also entertain him and keep his spirits up. So I don't know why the wardens would have kept just this letter. There must have been other correspondence, but that's what they found. Maybe they liked the letter because of the language. The writer is very vivid and acerbic in his wit, and perhaps it's an example of how funny, even in these times, Jews could be. His writing verges on the Rabelaisian. He pokes sharply at his friends and acquaintances, makes fun of all of them. And it's a window into the mood of the Jews in the early years of the Hitler reign. The Nuremberg laws were enacted in 1935. This is done at the beginning of 1936. The impact of the laws is not yet settled on them. And certainly nobody is aware of what horror is awaiting. And the author in the letter says nothing about the Nazi regime, since he knows the letter will be read by the authorities and scanned before they give it to my father. And of course, that would affect the appeal that my father was going through. Eventually, he was let out early, so that was lucky. So he made only one reference to it about my father's stupidity of getting caught in this. That's the only reference he makes to it, and says it's not his personality, not his fine character, so that's not relevant, it says, to this case. So he pokes fun of friends in the circles, and we can see how highly he regards my father in contrast. Doesn't talk about what Jews are going through, but there are indirect references to general difficulties in finding secure employment or economic security. The only reference to politics is to the Italian occupation of Ethiopia, right, where Mussolini has taken over Ethiopia, the fear of a war between the British and France against the Italians in the Mediterranean. Right? Nobody's thinking of a world war. Language is full of idioms and hyperbole, sometimes hard to understand. It's in script, and I appreciate the work of an Omer van Woerden who volunteered to transcribe it into typed text I could read. It starts, meine liebe Willi, my dear Willie, Willie from William. Jetzt ist dich geschehen habe, sind wieder 3 Wochen vergangen. Since I last spoke to you, 3 weeks have gone by. I'm not going to belabor you with the German, but here's what he talks about. Key points. More of the fun part. In the meantime, since Christmas, there were only 2 days that were worthy of note, New Year's and my birthday. I didn't want to celebrate Sylvester. Sylvester is the way Europeans term New Year's Eve. It's a Saint Sylvester. But in the one way I could understand, I'll tell myself, if Willie is not here, but instead he is in the Brandenburg prison, then there's no way to celebrate anything. It was clear that for your sake, I could think of no reason I would celebrate. You know, my spirit is lousy. I'm against celebrating. I told that to Roman, that's one of their friends, that he and Mürchen would come and reminisce over a glass of tea. That's all he wanted. Just 2 friends come and have a glass of tea. But then I wanted to make Erna happy. So I brought Roman, Mürchen, Irma, and myself tickets to the comic opera at 75. And he puts an exclamation mark. So 75 pennies. Today, US dollars, I figured out about $5 or twice the cost of going to the Drei Groschen opera, the 3-penny opera of Bertolt Brecht, maybe playing around that time also. That's the one where Mac the Knife comes from. That's the truth. I don't know if his exclamation mark is because it was so expensive or so cheap. I don't know. So it worked out differently than I planned. So he just wanted a cup of tea. That's all he wanted. On New Year's Eve at 6 p.m., Erna's ex-husband and his current wife suggested that following the opera, they would come to spend New Year's with me. Out of politeness rather than out of joy, I said yes. Hardly had they come, they also appeared a couple from the outskirts of Berlin, whom I more or less had befriended, some with the same suggestion. All of a sudden, a cup of tea becomes 6 people, 7 people. Again, I explained the plan, but also gave notice I would provide no alcohol, and for everyone would need to fend for himself. Finally, they bought tickets for the comic opera at 75 pfennig. And after completion of the cultural event, the whole social gathering took place in my apartment where a table was set. Served were sausages and potato salad, and again, sausages and potato salad. And for dessert, a salad made with peas and beans was passed around, with what afterwards turned out to have as bad consequences as could be. One could see that the economics is not quite what it used to be, right? Sausages and beans and sausages and beans and potato salad. To my great shock, I noticed, however, they were cheap on the food, but in addition to the other bottles, the provincial couple had brought 2 bottles of whiskey, 2 bottles of wine, and 3 bottles of champagne to make us foggy. Everything fell apart as I take note of my weakness for alcohol. Roman tried to get me drunk with downright sadistic pleasure. He cheered me up with prosit constantly, and I had to respond. Prosit, 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 willing every time with another drink. Erna was soon tipsy and glowed like a red bulb. Maybe it was like too much of a sun lamp cure. I don't believe it. And you, around midnight, the company was already half wobbly, looking for me to systematically finish everything. Lion Brown, Lion's first name, was pale as a corpse, and Roman began to target the wall with pancakes as for a mural. This can still be seen. So there comes an old adage, who digs a pit for others. Oh. Roman had become completely wasted in the course of the evening, and afterwards, as the senior member here, I went to the toilet, and as a decent man locked the door, and I heard an urgent knock from the outside and opened the door, and who rushed forwards to me with a mouth of seltzer water, the fat Roman. I'd never seen anyone so pale. Well, you can imagine, I'm not going to go into depth what exactly happened to him. He describing how he vomits, and finally he recovers from that a little bit. He gives himself to philosophical considerations about the comparison of human life with the famous Hinterleiter, which was a book, a German translation of a book called Life is Like a Chicken Coop Ladder, where the chickens are on a ladder like this inside the coop, and the chickens on the bottom get pooped on from the chickens on top. So it explains a popular German saying that life is like a chicken coop ladder full of filth. That's what it's talking about. That's the topic of discussion. It's still the bleakest. So the chicken coop ladder, he got rid of his ruined shirt and ran half as dull like a madman till he fell exhausted on the floor. Okay, so they come to their senses. We were drinking to your health, and our card's contents express our deep feelings. I hope our wishes have arrived. In addition, Willie, I personally found myself completely out of balance since your fall. Must confess that only the idea that keeps me still going, you get the things that you have an old friend in Berlin. He goes on, he gives a little bit of family background. You are a constitutionally sound, logical man. I hope to God you will well weather this difficult time, especially since I was able to convince myself that the institution you're in is a very humane institution to receive decent treatment. Unbelievably, the German prisons were actually among the most advanced and humane of prisons worldwide. The Nazis gradually turned them into torture prisons, but they were still operating under the old system. So my father's conditions were tolerable. I'm convinced that after your release, a few weeks of nursing by your mother will be enough to get you afloat again. I think your professors and colleagues will forgive this inexplicable and unexpected prank of yours. So you're a fine and decent man, and I hope later we'll see you act as I see in the derailment by unusual circumstances, one fundamentally decent person. So it goes on. I'm going to not belabor too much. Talks about the war in Abyssinia. It talks about some people who are moving here and there, different jobs and events. Now, his conclusion, my dear Willie, don't let your head hang down. Everything will be over, and I hope I can soon get a letter from you. I'll visit you again in the next possible opportunity. Goodbye, my good young man, Oscar. All right, so still in the midst of a period where everything is gloomy, he's trying to cheer up my father, a little bit of humor, a little bit of nonsense for the New Year's in that period. So what happened afterwards, my father was released from prison. He was there about 2 years. It was supposed to be many, many more years on the condition that he'd leave Germany forever, which he was quite happy to do. And he was able to finish his rabbinic studies actually in Berlin, which is in prison by correspondence. He made his way to Austria. He was able to publish 3 essays on the dangers of facing contemporary civilization, which I have copies of, determinism as opposed to free will. Escaped to Czechoslovakia when the Germans came into Austria. Was again caught by the Germans when they took over Czechoslovakia, and knowing that he had a problematic background of political activism in Germany, he was one of the first people rounded up when they got into Czechoslovakia, put them into a beautiful prison called Spielberg, not named after the movie director, but Spielberg in Czech. It's in the capital city of Brno, a famous prison which was used by the old Austrian Empire to house all their political prisoners, and the Germans remodeled it for their new political prisoners. So, to his good luck, he was sent out by one of Eichmann's first trains to Poland, exactly as the World War II broke out in September of 1939. And Eichmann's intention was to dump these prisoners on the border with the Soviets, who had by then taken the other half of Poland, because there's swamplands, and swamplands with malaria and disease, and they were hoping they would just sit there and die. And my father didn't hang around waiting for that. He was able to escape that border and got into the Soviet-held side of Poland and got out. So I just shared that, a little slice of life, yeah.
The areas around
Yeah, Prussia in that area had marshes. I think as you go further to the east, they were called the Pripyat marshes. And that's how the Germans destroyed the Russian army. And that's how Hindenburg became famous, because he entrapped the Russian army. That's what I remember my father told me. He entrapped the Russian army in the marshes. They were stuck in the swamps, couldn't maneuver, and then the Germans were able to blast them apart. We forget this. The Russians surrendered to the Germans. Had the Americans not gotten into World War I, the Russians would have held up, the Germans would have held up. Russia collapsed. That's the biggest possible enemy. Russia collapsed. So the Austrians would have managed, without the Russians, they would have managed to hold on to what they had. So had the Americans not come in, right, a lot of things would have changed. And it was the swamps that did them in. Yeah. That's it. Okay, so let's finish up with Adon Olam on page 514. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Leit Nasa V'Hefzo Kol Azai Melech Shemo Nikra V'Yacharei Kichlot HaKol Levado Yimloch Nora V'hu Aya V'hu Hove V'hu Yeh B'Tifara V'hu Echad V'Ein Sheni להמשיל לו להכבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוד והמשרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, וצורכב לי בעת צרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוסי ביום אקרא בידו, אפקיד רוחי, בעת אישה ויעירה, V'meruchi geviati Adonai li v'lo ira. Shabbat shalom. Oh.
Okay.